All right, welcome everyone. Thank you for coming to the very first podcast under our new name. So I looked back in the last year, we've done 36 episodes of this podcast, and we're now partnering with MTS and wanted to sort of do a bigger conversation in this live format to be able to celebrate the new direction of the podcast. So we're now called Leaning In and Speaking Out. So I want to first of all thank you all for being here and being part of this important conversation. Before we get too far, I want to take a moment to have all of you have the chance to introduce yourself. So I wondered, Bev, would you be willing to start us off? Could you introduce yourself? Thanks.
Sure. Danse, Bev Fontaine, Nitisanigasun. Hello, my name is Bev Fontaine. I'm the Director of Education for Opaskwayak Cree Nation. Along with myself, I have invited a number of our staff to participate in this podcast, and so I'll give them the opportunity to introduce themselves.
Danse, Karon McGillivary. I've been working with Joey Ross School for 40 years. I'm the principal of Joey Ross School.
Danse, Marcella Clarke, Vice Principal Nino de Oscar Lathlin Collegiate.
Danse, Linda Constantine is Nikasun, Nistamus Kinomage and Disnoharan, my name is Linda Constant. I teach kindergarten Cree-Immersion and that. I'm originally from Grand Rapids, and I've been with OES for 10 years now.
Danse, Barb, Ehman, and Nisnigasun. I teach grade 3 Cree-Immersion. Nigas Kinamagano, we're going 11 years.
Danse, Sylvia Lathlin-Scott, Nitisanigasun. Utani Notis Koneganik, Vice Principal, Titagisun, Joey Ross School. Hi, my name is Sylvia Lathlin-Scott. I'm from Opaskwayak Cree Nation, and I am the Vice Principal for Joey Ross School. That was it.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. And I also want to offer Davin the opportunity to give an introduction here.
Anin Bojo, Davin Dumas, Nidij Nikas, Kawi Kwen Longok Nidonji. I'm Davin Dumas from Sandy Bay Ojibwe Nation in Treaty 1 territory. And I'm currently employed as the Director of Languages and Cultures at the Manitoba First Nations Education Resource Center.
All right, should we dive right in now, Jackie?
Let's dive right in.
All right, so the very first question on our list for the conversation is to just take a few moments to talk about what the steps are that your community took in order to revitalize Indigenous language learning. If you could tell us about those initiatives, that would be great.
This is Bev here, and I can lead the discussion or conversation on this. Our journey with, I'll focus in on the Cree-Immersion because that's when we started spending more time and energy on, actual revitalization. Our journey starts back in about 2003 when our elders approached us with their concern that we were losing the language at a quicker rate than was to be expected. And so what we did as an education system is that we took this on, and we started having consultations with the community, with the students, with leadership. And what was a result of that is that we were approved for a pilot to begin a Cree-Immersion program at the kindergarten level in 2006. We approached Onion Lake, Saskatchewan Nation to help us with this task, and I need to put it out there, give credit where credit is due, that they were a great help and resource to us, providing us with materials, resources, and so I need to put that acknowledgement out there. And it was, we didn't expect the success that we did have with that first year. We thought we'd maybe have one class of a kindergarten in the Cree-Immersion, and we ended up, the demand was so high, we had 3 classes of Cree-Immersion that we had to get going that year. And so what happened after that first year is every year after we added a grade, and we ended up doing that up to grade 6. And then we had to stop at grade 6 because we had a shortage of Cree fluent teachers. So that continued over the years, and in 2010, the board established a Cree Language Committee as a standing committee of the board. And that was established in order to ensure that the focus stayed on our Cree-Immersion program and that we continue to build on that program and keep it at the forefront. And so that was an important thing that was done at the governance level. And what you need to realize over this period of time too is we had to do a lot of proposal writing, and our teachers need to receive the credit for creating materials and resources on their own time, on weekends. That's how we were able to do a lot of our curriculum material work and get it out to our students. So over the years with proposal writing, we did different things. We brought a Cree curriculum developer on for 1 year. We did initiatives with elders to try and get to have our elders involved in the program. And we had Cree language classes. So we did a lot of different initiatives over the years. In 2014, we had 40% of our student population in the Cree-Immersion program. And since then, we've been slowly noticing a decline in our student population in the immersion program. So we are at 32% of students in our Cree-Immersion program. So that's concerning for us. The other thing that happened in the, about 6-7 years ago was we also created a Cree language policy. And this is important for our 3 program areas, for our OCN history program, our land-based education program, and our Cree-Immersion program. In order for a student to graduate from our high school, they need to have a Cree credit, a Cree language credit, and they need to have an OCN credit. So those are really important to the work that we're doing in these program areas. And the staff and the administrators can, I'm just trying to give a high level picture of what we have been doing over the years. So if the staff want to add anything, they can. And in the last few years also, we've had elders come into the classroom and help in the classroom on a daily basis. And we were, with the elders' help, we were able to create our own Cree language dictionary. That happened in 2016. And there I want to acknowledge Fisher River Nation for sharing their dictionary with us. And we use that as a guide as we developed ours. The other thing that we took the lead role in education was developing a Cree language declaration for our community. So we did that work in 2015, and we got it approved by our leadership in January 2016. So that was that's a large, that's a big achievement for our community to get that support from our leadership, so that we're not the only ones doing the work to revitalize the language. And in recent years, we've been working on developing our own Cree curriculum. And so we have a document now, we have a framework document where we focus on our OCN history, our land-based education program, and our Cree Language Immersion program. So, and again, you know what, this work that we do it with our teachers, our administrators. We take time out on weekends to do a lot of this foundational and developmental work. So I really depend a lot on our staff to help us do this work and get this work done. Another big achievement for us in developing our OCN history program, because our OCN history is taught right from kindergarten to grade 12, we actually created our own history book, and we published that in 2019. So this document, I don't know if you can see it, I did send Virgil a copy of it, but this is a key document that is used by our teachers now to teach OCN history. So that took a few years, but you know, we have our own history book now. And you know, so it doesn't, this work does not come easily, you know, and I need to put that out there. We've had our share of challenges in going down the path we have. It's but we always say we got to move forward, we got to keep going forward, and that's basically, you know, in a nutshell, how we've come down this journey with our program.
Thank you so much for sharing. There's some really exciting things happening. And thank you for holding up the book too. I think that's so inspiring to see it all kind of come together in something that you can show on the camera, right? I wonder, Davin, would you be willing to tell us a little bit about some of the goals and initiatives from the Manitoba First Nations Education Resource Center perspective?
Sure, but before I get into that, I just wanted to say, you know, the work that OCN has done is a great example of perseverance, you know, in light of all of the systems that still continue to work against our communities and our languages. So I think it's important. I wanted to make that comment because, you know, the stuff that Bev had talked about just now are leaps and bounds ahead of many communities in what they have. And I think they bring forward some, you know, some processes that a lot of communities would like to get to with their history and with their work in immersion programming and that. So in regards to the MFNERC, so MFNERC has been in existence now for over 20 years. And the primary focus for MFNERC was always to provide second level services to First Nations member communities. And in that time, proposals were written to access funding on behalf of the First Nations to implement different types of programs. The problem that has always been in place is that the government held the purse strings, and they're the ones that made the decisions on yes or no, whether or not specific activities were going to be allowed or not. And these were decisions that were made by non-First Nations, non-educators, judging educational processes and programs and things like that. So one of the biggest things that has always been blocked is curriculum. Anytime the word curriculum was written in a proposal, it would get a strike through in all the proposals. So for many, many years, many First Nations, including OCN, had requested curriculum resources, resources for teaching of the language and things like that. And it was always difficult to justify allocating time and resources to that when they weren't allowed in the proposals. Now that some of that funding has changed in the way that the funding is provided, MFNERC has been going through a transition process. And with that transition process, we've come up with a new plan and a new approach to providing services. Now that there's a little lessening of the restrictions that have been previously in place for second level service organizations, we're able to do some different planning. One of the things that we're doing is changing the whole structure within languages and cultures and making that department, amalgamating that department with a few areas. And I was brought on to oversee that process. And that process involves 4 pillars, what we're calling 4 pillars for the organization in focusing on languages and cultures. And those 4 pillars are instructional resource development, capacity building, in-school supports, and community-based planning. So each of those have different activities within them that we'll be working with communities more focused. And, you know, for example, in instructional resource development, part of the activities in there will be developing classroom resources for teaching languages, which is something that, you know, we've seen very little of, but now that there's some lightening of restrictions, we're going to be moving forward with that. Setting some language vetting and standards for language learning. We're going to look at collaborative processes for developing materials with communities. So it goes along the line with capacity building. We want to work with communities to be able to have their own capacity, to have their own people who will be able to build resources and, in a sense, duplicate some of the processes that OCN has already been through. And, you know, I know there are examples, and OCN is a prime example of how some of those processes can be successful and can come to fruition with hard work and perseverance. So in a nutshell, our focus of the organization is going to be now focusing on languages and cultures. So we provide services to communities and schools in all of the 5 First Nation languages in Manitoba. So it's going to be exciting. The only thing kind of slowing things right now is the pandemic. But once the pandemic lets up a bit, then we will really start to move forward.
Thank you. It sounds like there's some really positive directions, and that's exciting to hear. Thank you for sharing that. I think this might be a good place to ask Burju if she could share a little bit about the community-based research project that she's collaboratively engaged in.
Thank you. So my name is Burcu Yaman Netelioğlu. I'll just wanted to say that I would like to really acknowledge also the fact that, you know, I live and work in Treaty 2 land, and as a non-Indigenous scholar, having the really privilege to be able to work with the amazing group of First Nations educators that you're meeting here has been a true privilege for me. So I wanted to thank them, and always learning and being inspired, and the work that we do together. And yeah, so I think this work continues, and I'm so happy that both Michelle and Jackie, you've invited us and created this platform, and for us to be able to share this work. And I hope that this will be ongoing work. So as Bev explained, I think the initiatives are really inspiring. And yet this doesn't mean that there aren't challenges. And I wanted to begin a little bit by, I know that so many of us in this group are really aware of some of the urgencies and challenges with respect to Indigenous language revitalization, which, because this is a podcast that would be shared and recorded with a larger audience, I just wanted to share very briefly and talk about this urgency. UNESCO shared that of the 7,000 existing languages across the world, 5,000 are spoken by different Indigenous cultures. And currently 2,680 of these Indigenous languages are disappearing at an alarming rate, as the communities speaking them are confronted with assimilation, enforced relocation, educational disadvantage, poverty, illiteracy, and other forms of discrimination and human rights violations. So this really points to the urgency both locally as well as globally. And we know that with respect to the recent literature on Indigenous languages around the world, there's that urgent need And this is also stressed with the Truth and Reconciliation Commission's calls to action. And McCartney and Nicholas explain that for Indigenous communities, their language is essential to cultural continuity and community sustainability. And I think that's important. Yes, you know, our goal, as many of us will speak passionately, is really to try to think about how might we make this process easier for Indigenous communities to reclaim and revitalize the many languages and the many dialects of those languages. And I think that it's also important to recognize the role of schools in doing that. And schools historically have been places where the languages have been erased, right? How can we change that? And I think in our collaborations and conversations, I think it's really important to think about those social and political implications of and identity connections to this important work. So I just wanted to begin by that. And I think that now that, like, maybe 10 years ago, when this project maybe started or was in earlier years, there was less examples in terms of literature on how this was done, but more and more, I think there are researchers who are really looking at that and trying to understand how can we do that collaboratively, because this is really challenging work. And so let's talk about the research project. So this collaborative relationship between OCN and Brandon University dates back to, you know, as researchers, we do look at the history, and Bev showed you the wonderful book that showcases that powerful history that dates back to 1992, right? And this community-based project is really also a kind of model. All of the data is owned by the community. The research questions are always coming from the needs of, or the goals, the questions of the educators, community members, elders. And I think that very quickly in the study, one of the things that the community recognized that, you know, yes, there were surveys that were conducted to try to look at the experiences of the teachers and students in both the Cree-Immersion program and the English program to understand, you know, how are their experiences? You know, what are things that are going well? What are things that need to be studied, or, you know, what challenges emerge? And I think there were many learning lessons throughout, and I think it's good to and I'm sure that the educators will point to some of these challenges. Like one of the things that Bev mentioned, which is huge, was looking at a BA B.Ed degree, right? And that really, you know, the ideas for that also was reinforced by what was noticed in the data that we were looking at. Teachers were saying that educators were finding it difficult, schools were finding it difficult to find trained Cree speakers who are educated with pedagogy and education. And it's wonderful that the OCN community took that on and said, okay, if it's really hard to find these educators who are trained, why don't we create that program? So I think that that's why it's so exciting to share some of those initiatives, and there's so much to share. But I think looking at it from a research perspective, and maybe in this audience there are some grad students or other researchers who are trying to look at either Indigenous language revitalization or Indigenous paradigms of approaching research and decolonizing research. I think that making those connections will be important, right? So OEA owns all data, information, and findings with respect to this research. And there is collaboration that takes place from the initial stages of formulating the research question, collecting the data, going to the data and thinking about the data, like Bev, Karon, and the educators. We've been meeting regularly to look at the data and saying, okay, this is what we're noticing. For example, one of the things that we were noticing was in the Cree-Immersion program, less students were being sent to the principal's office, right? And we wanted to understand the reasons why, like why was this taking place? And we know that in our English program too, that there are valuable cultural teachings that are being integrated. Could language be the factor? And, you know, to make judgments and to make decisions about what we're seeing and how we're seeing them, it's important. So I'll end with like Sean Wilson is a brilliant scholar who is also from the OCN community. And he says that research is all about unanswered questions, but it also reveals our unquestioned answers. So together, we're looking for those research questions, but we're also looking at our own interpretations and trying to critically analyze, you know, why we're immediately giving those answers. So it's a process of learning for all of us. And I'm truly humbled to being a part of this.
Thank you so
I'll
much.
end it here for the moment. Yes.
Thank you. We can just all see the excitement radiating from your face. I can tell this is something you're very passionate about, and it's wonderful to hear. And I loved how you framed the broader conversation at the beginning. Thank you for sharing that with us. I wonder, Karon, if you'd be able to describe some of your Cree-Immersion program for us.
As Bev mentioned, the pilot project started in 2006 with kindergarten students. Our Cree-Immersion program is taught kindergarten to grade 3, 100% at the time, and grades 4 to grade 6, 80%. Today, with community concerns, while the teachers are teaching half hour Cree to kindergarten, half hour of English to kindergarten and grade 3, and an hour of English to grades 4 to grade 6, and the rest of the time is Cree. Now, one of the challenges that we have is trying to get the parents to understand that Cree is very important to our community and that we are losing it. And the concerns were the declining enrollment of our Cree-Immersion program. All the instruction that the Cree has been going on is developed by the teachers. So as they are teaching, they are also developing the material because we do not have materials at hand. One of the good things that are really happening is that when we do develop the materials, we can start putting them into posters thanks to Oscar Lathlin Collegiate's machinery and their technology that's happening over there. So we've got posters going also. The other thing too is that I'd like to really commend the teachers coming in together to develop the programs and develop the resources to continue on with the instruction in the classrooms. The other thing is elder involvement. We get the elders involved, but not since COVID. The elders haven't been in, but since before that, they are coming in on a continuous basis into the classrooms. We've also included the English classrooms with elder involvement. And the Cree is also instructed for a half an hour as a subject area to the English classrooms. The other thing too is technology. The Cree have traveling laptops where they can access apps, so the students can practice Cree on the app with the laptops. the teachers came together and created benchmarks for each grade level, but they're general benchmarks. One of the things that I was really concerned about was the assessment, as Burjo was mentioning, that assessment is really part of how we assess our students with Cree. In the Western delivery of instruction, we tend to look at our students like the Western, like we teach them the Western style rather than using the Cree style. That's one of the things that we got out of the research that we're developing as I was going with the data for the school-wide assessments. Other than that, everything else is going really well in terms of continuous development of our Cree-Immersion program. We'll have Barb talk about the unit planning.
Michelle, may I quickly comment on what Karon said about assessment, because I think it's such an exciting topic, and this is so important, yes, for the Cree-Immersion program itself and for Indigenous communities. I find that some of these insights that these educators are finding out as we look at the process is also really enlightening with respect to K-12 assessment in general, to both the Western world as well as Indigenous communities who are really working very hard to understand how we might change the curriculum, how we might change instruction and assessment. Like, I think that one of the strengths of Indigenous ways of being and how it's teaching us with respect to pedagogy and curriculum is that that ontological, like paying attention to the relationships, right? When we're doing our assessment, you know, are we using, and you know, from an academic perspective, I think when I say paying attention to relational ontologies, the academics who are listening will have a sense of what I'm talking about. But I think when we pay attention to emplacing assessment through a relational ontology that Indigenous ways of being and knowing teaches us, it really shapes what we think of assessment and the practices of assessment, right? It's no longer a mark on a page, but it's beyond that. How do we build that relationship? What does it really truly mean to use and communicate through that language? And what are the different accountability practices that shows us multiple evidences of learning in these communities? So I'll end it here, but yeah, that's why I said it's always a learning journey for all of us, and there are lots of strong implications to all schools, not just schools in Indigenous communities.
Do you find that as the language becomes the vehicle for the education, and as these practices are changing, do you find that it happens simultaneously? Like you start rethinking assessment because you're thinking through a different language? Does it happen like that?
I think I'll let the educators really comment about that, but I think like in our conversations, in our interviews with teachers, students, and parents, I think, for example, land-based approaches to learning about language. Yes, you're learning the terminologies, the language, but you're also learning a way of being. And in that way of being, what are the respectful instructional and assessment practices, right? And that does justice to that holistic experience. So definitely, but I'll let educators join to this conversation. They have so much to share. So I'll stop here and yeah.
All right, educators, let's hear from you.
Okay. We brainstormed our unit plans together after school working hours in grade groups. We worked together as a group to put the learning outcomes and content after school. The year plan was made for the grade 3 for the curriculum framework. I made my own unit plans to match the units of the curriculum framework for grade 3. I planned the learning strategies and differentiated instructions for grade 3. The unit plans were planned and integrated into subjects with the theme that goes with it. And this is actually the curriculum framework, and all the subjects were covered. Math, science, social studies, everything worked all together as a theme in a unit. So that's what we did. These are the things that I planned for grade 3 for each month.
I just want to share for people who couldn't see on the screen, it looks like a circular framework instead of the sort of Western linear model. First we do this and then we do this, right? So I wonder, other teachers are welcome to chime in, or Burju or Davin or Karon, any of you might want to talk about some of your efforts with the curriculum creation or creating your own curriculum.
I'll get Linda to talk about the lesson plans, her instruction or Cree instruction.
I followed the same template as Barb did. I was part of the curriculum framework that we did on that. But with my Cree program, I do a lot of visuals. I develop a lot of resources in the classroom that I use, because I find that with the little kids, they catch on a lot faster when they're looking at visuals, and we do the oral lessons and that. I utilize the elders when they're in the school and that for storytelling and giving history on them, on the OCN and that. I do have that OCN history framework. So we do that, and I develop a lot of my own resources and that to help the students and that. So it's a learning experience and that, and I find that too when I'm teaching the kids, when I'm doing a half-hour English program. I read the books with them in English, but I also reframe to the Cree program. So while they're doing that reading at the same time in English, we're doing it in Cree. So they're learning both languages. And when I send resources home for the parents to help the students learn the program, I put the words in English, and that's so the parents will also know what they're teaching their kids, and they're finding that they're also learning the program that way.
Priscilla still there?
Yeah, she's still here.
Hey, Priscilla, go ahead.
Hi, my name is Priscilla, and I'll actually see if I can find a share screen so you'll have an idea of what we're looking at. Now you can see it? Okay. Okay, this is the one Barb was talking about here. And this is the unit plan that we had developed. So this is a winter one. So this is grade 2, by the way. So we kind of use both Western worldview and Indigenous worldviews. So we have all our communication, our writing, our vocabularies on there monthly. We've made it into monthly units. As you can see, I have 2 comprehension on reading. Those are books, mini unit books that I have done. And then on the bottom on how thunder and earthquake made ocean. So that comes from another book, from a book that we had got from Saskatchewan, and thanks to them, we've used a lot of the resources as a guide to develop our resources too. And this is some of the stuff that we have been doing. We do music songs that we have to translate songs in Cree on a steady basis. We try and do readers theater. And with help, we try and do, we integrated TP teaching, 7 teachings with PATS. I don't know if you know that program PATS, but we also follow that. In social studies, we have these global connections where we actually integrate both local connections and also into the outside world beyond to the other side there towards Europe and all that stuff. So we do have a lot of visuals and audios that we've been doing, and the way that students learn quickly too is through song. We use a lot of TPR, and I am fluent speaker in American Sign Language, so that helps too, because we use a lot of movement when we introduce new outcomes to the students, and reading and writing, introducing new animals and colors, and using sign language in the class also in TPR. The kids catch on quickly onto their lessons, and after a while, you don't even have to say the words with the kids. As soon as you start using your hands, using sign language or TPR, the kids catch on and they understand the expectations that they have. What we have been doing too is we're in the middle of making sight words. So what we have been doing, from kindergarten to grade 6, we've been asking each other how many words should they know by the end of kindergarten, grade 1, and so on. So we've actually been collaborating and where we left off, where each person should be teaching to a certain level. But it's the so we're steady creating, adapting, changing weekly, communicating on a daily basis for our kids to progress, understand, and have a sense of belonging when they come into the school. That speaking the language, it does give you that sense of belonging. You have that because when we talk Cree to them, I find that the kids, we're going back into indigeneity, and the kids have that excitement when they learn new words and they're excited to use them at home.
Thank you. Did anyone else want to talk about their efforts with curriculum creation or creating their own curriculum? I know, Gavin, you do some work too, but anyone else, feel free.
I'll get Sylvia to talk about the importance of connecting with the land.
Okay.
We do land-based programming with all our children, with all the students. Okay, Sylvia?
Yeah. With connecting with the land, when we first started taking the students out on the land and we utilized our elders, it was very effective as using the elders as teachers. It reinforced what they learned in the classroom and taking it out into the land to make it more meaningful for them. And I'm, like I mentioned, we're at camp right now, and it's different because we don't have our elders in the camp, and we can sense that it's missing. It's different. It's a different feeling, but we do what we can in getting the students to be connected with the land. And my personal views on this, you have a connection with nature. For myself personally, I find peace within myself when I'm out on the land, and knowing that our ancestors were there before us. And for me, that's my connection. They walked and lived off the land. It's a part of our being, and it makes languages that more important to know that your identity as an Aboriginal. With that, I'd just like to comment on, I was evaluating teachers the past 2 weeks, and Linda Constant did a very, very good presentation with her students in the nursery program. I was just marveled by the amount and the effort that she put into with the teaching, with the lessons. She had a model there, and she was really persistent with the Cree, speaking in Cree. Her use of English was minimal, and I was very impressed with that. I told Linda, you did such an awesome job. Yeah. Oh yes, I wanted to mention too that when Bev was talking, that one of our ways of promoting our language too was we did a Cree Language App with the elders, and I had the honor of sitting and working with the elders and developing that Cree Language App for use all over the place.
That's fantastic. I get really excited hearing all of these things that are happening. I don't always know all of this, and so this is I'm so grateful to be part of this, even though I'm learning, I think, more than I'm able to say. But thank you for sharing. I want to move maybe to some of the challenges.
Michelle, I think,
sorry, go ahead.
sorry, before we move on, I think, Marcella, you were going to say a couple of words about the high school portion. Lots to share.
Well, that's good to hear.
Okay.
Go ahead, Marcella.
Okay, we've developed a curriculum from 7 all the way up to 12. And now we have the 2 Cree teachers, you know, grade 7 and 8 does one, and then the other one does the rest. But it's something that's been in the works for several years. Plus, it follows a model where outdoor ed and land-based education all fall into the one model. They follow the one model, and it follows the cultural and the traditional practices and the different ceremonies and ceremonial followings. Yeah, the different teachings.
Marcella, would it be possible to elaborate a little bit about like the Cree language framework that you have, and then the connections that you have? I know you're talking about land-based, and you know,
yeah,
all our relations, and all of the teachers pointed to that. Barb pointed to that.
Yeah.
Sylvia pointed to that. Can you elaborate on those? Because I think that might be something interesting to some of our non-Indigenous educators who might be listening as well.
The curriculum is based on the 7 kingdoms, the 2-legged, the creator, you know, and it goes on up to, so each outcome then is matched up with which kingdom, and that decides when the outcome is taught, what season it's taught, how long it's taught for. And there's the 2-legged, the 4-legged, and how everything connects, how the different kingdoms connect with the different outcomes that we have.
Could I ask how long the high school program has been going? Like, have you seen the students that started learning Cree even in nursery? Have they moved up into your program yet, or they're?
Yeah, they've already some of them have already graduated.
Wow, that's amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you.
And they're introducing syllabics now, and we're getting sets of syllabic fonts made.
Wow. I want to make sure I didn't jump ahead of anyone else who wanted to talk. Was there anyone else who wanted to talk about curriculum development or any of the kind of classroom practices before we jump into sort of barriers and what we might see as ways to overcome those barriers?
Well, you know, if I may, I wanted to add, you know, OCN is an example of exemplary work in the work that they've done. You know, and one of the things that I wanted to point out was that they've done it, and you hear from the extra time after school on the weekends that they've been working on this, and it just shows the commitment that they've had from their people that work with them. Because you know, I know for a fact that First Nations have never been afforded any funding to support curriculum development. And, you know, seeing that OCN has been able to do what they have is a great accomplishment. And, you know, when we even look at some of the things that have been happening recently, even with the new Indigenous Languages Act, even though it recognizes Indigenous languages, it still doesn't recognize Indigenous languages in the same way that French and English are recognized, and the supports that they're entitled to receive. You know, I would be, I can't even imagine what OCN would be able to do if they were afforded the same luxuries of French and English in ensuring that funds are available to do everything that they need to do to ensure the language is preserved. And that goes for any First Nation. But you know, with OCN, they've laid the groundwork for a lot of the processes, and with you know, like I said, I can't imagine the work that they would do. And it goes back to even some of the other documents that are still not being implemented as they should. Even the TRC calls to action. You know, there's recommendations in there about funding for curriculum and languages, and that's not being followed. That's not being supported. There's also UNDRIP, which finally Canada signed on to. They weren't signatory to the first round, but they finally signed on, and there's lots in there that they're not recognizing or following through yet. So there's lots of there's still lots of hurdles for First Nations. And like I said, OCN is an example of resilience and perseverance in the development that they've done. And you know, unfortunately, I wish that all of our communities, First Nations communities, would be at the same place that they're at. But unfortunately, they're not. There's some that have not even started their journey, and some can't. I worked in a couple of communities where language loss is so profound that there's literally a handful of speakers left, and they're not able to work in a school because they're elderly. I know of one community, one First Nation community in Manitoba, they've experienced complete language loss. So they kind of have a unique Ojibwe dialect, and it's gone. They won't bring it back. So now they're utilizing Ojibwe speakers from other communities to revitalize the language. So, you know, you are right that we're in a crisis mode when it comes to languages for some of our communities. Even for us as an organization that works with the 5 language groups, we have a very difficult time finding language speakers in some of the groups. Dakota is one area we have a very hard time finding people who are able to work and help translate and do that kind of work in their language. So yeah, so it's I'm glad they brought up land-based, because that connection to the land is very important, and I think that's part of the key. And I believe it was Karon had talked about that balance of Western education. And you know, one of the things that I always run into in some of the research that I've done and work is how our own people don't validate the knowledge of our knowledge keepers and of our elders. They always seem to want a westernized university or organization to acknowledge to recognize their knowledge before it's accepted. So we have some barriers, but I know we'll get into talking about some of the challenges as well shortly.
I think we're already talking about that. So let's just open that up to anyone who wants to share about challenges with respect to Indigenous language revitalization.
I'll share what I have.
Oh, okay.
One of them is parental engagement. We found over the years that it's difficult to get the parents immersed in our programs. And I know OES have tried many ways of getting the parents to participate. We do get a handful, but you know, we want more of our community members to want to learn the language. And also the number of people that speak the language. And Devin just mentioned that they're not qualified because they don't have the degree. And I know we could utilize them. They're rich in our language. But again, it all goes back to the qualifications. And also, I'm finding that teachers that don't put forth the effort in teaching I'd say 100%, 125%, try and get them to be motivated to continue, because we don't have very many speakers that are teachers. Like we have Barb, Ehman, she's going to be retiring and we're going to have to replace her. And that's going to be difficult. I'm finding that the positions that we do fill, they understand the language, but a lot of them are not fluent speakers. And it's sad to see that. The passion starts to wear off, and the language needs to be taught in the classroom, and we can't lose sight of that. Those are the notes that I have put forth when I was thinking about this, the challenges. Thank you.
For challenges, I had mentioned the decrease in enrollment in our immersion program, and that, in my opinion, goes to the resistance from our community members who are unaware of the benefits of having more than one language. And that's what we've tried to put focus on in the last few years, is promoting the benefits of 2 languages for their children. And it goes back to, you know, our community members being colonized to believe, you know, or to think that English is the only language that our students need to succeed. So to me, that's like a major challenge that we need to try and overcome. The other challenge that I wanted to put out there, and Sylvia mentioned it as well, is finding fluent teachers. Virgil did mention that from the research project that we were engaged with, that teacher mobility was an issue in our immersion program. And so we did engage with Brandon University into a partnership where we began our own BA BEd program. And those students that are in that program are now in year 4. And some of them are going to be Cree-Immersion teachers. So it's just, that's the whole, I think, you know, one of our challenges is that we need to be able to keep educating the community members to be teachers, those that are fluent. It's really important that we have that continuity to keep the program going. So those are 2 concerning areas for me.
You know, I just want to, you know, spin off of what Bev is saying, and that, you know, I was going to mention that funding is definitely an issue. I think Bev can, you know, agree to that, that if we had more funding, or if our language development processes were funded properly, that we'd see a lot more development and a lot more resources for children and adults. Part of the issue is we have adults who are non-speakers, and there's no place to get that language learning for them, especially some of the young parents whose children are learning and are not able to reinforce it at home. So that's a tough one. And we're not given any funds to support any kind of adult language learning at this time. There is the Indigenous Languages Act funding. It's very limited. It's very difficult to access, and you know, makes it hard to do anything with. They did a call for proposals. We submitted one, and we got a response stating that it would be 30 weeks before we'd hear anything back. 30 weeks.
Yeah.
For a project that's supposed to start in a couple of weeks. So, but that, you know, a bit deeper than that though, and Bev touched on that, and I think where we still struggle is with the historical trauma that is directly related to, number one, settler colonial views, settler colonialism, which is still alive and well in systems that are in place. That whole thought of settler notions is still present, even in our court systems, in the Western education system, and it's deeply entrenched. And it's hard for people to understand that that there needs to be a different way. And I think it might have been Sylvia or Karon who had talked about how we need to change our thought process back to the Indigenous way of thinking, connecting to the land and all those types of great things that, you know, I know they see happening, and in the children are happier, definitely. but also a lot of that dissension. Even, you know, I've even seen examples of where our own people speak against the language. You know, you're wasting your time. Our kids don't need that. Very negative comments, you know, comments that I wouldn't want to share in an open forum like this, that speak against our people. And, you know, that leads right back to the residential schools. And I can't stress how harmful, how much hurt, how much of a negative effect the residential schools had on our people. A lot of these residual effects from the residential schools are so entrenched in our people that, you know, they're almost blind to it. And it hurts. It hurts once you come to the realization, you can recognize and see it, and see the lateral violence that stems from that. And it's awful. And, you know, but when we think about it, you know, the whole process, settler colonialism, residential schools, was designed to get rid of First Nation status, First Nation languages. But you can see by the people that are in here today and the work they're doing that they weren't successful, and they're not going to be successful. So we're resilient people in how we've been able to persevere, and our languages are still here. We haven't lost them. And our elders always say that languages are within. It's just a matter of bringing them out. You never lose them. You'll even hear some of our elders talk about blood memory, that it's in our blood, so you can't lose it. You can forget it, but we can bring it out. So, and again, we still have government policies that are dictating how we do things, when we do things. Even as recently as last week with Bill 64 with the Education Act, I question how much First Nations consultation was involved in the development of that. It's going to have very deep impacts into First Nations education, even though our First Nations communities are federal responsibility, but the federal government says, we don't have an act, so you follow the provincial act. If you don't, we won't give you funding. So they still hold that over us. And even on top of that was Bill 47, which is the Early Childhood Act that was released. That affects our efforts with early childhood education, daycare, Head Start programming as well. So there was a new act there that I haven't even had a chance to review myself. So yeah, it's very important. There's lots of challenges, and it comes right from highest levels of government, right down, right to our own people and that are creating barriers. But I think as long as we continue to have people, especially, you know, OCN is a prime example of those kind of people that we need to ensure that languages, you know, thrive and survive, you know, we'll keep going. And I know they're going to keep going. So, yeah, so just thought I would share that.
I think just one more comment from me. You know, to go down the path of immersion programming is a daunting task. And I know even, you know, when we went down this path, it was, you know, it was difficult, you know, going down a new path that it was, you know, you don't know whether you're going to succeed or fail, and you don't want to fail, right? So as much as possible, we do try and help provide that assistance to nations, other nations that ask for documents, and, you know, how we went forward. We're very open about that. And I think once you can start into a program, it just kind of takes off from there. So I just wanted to share that too.
I just wanted to point to, like, I think there are so many importance being raised, and parental engagement is one issue that came up for sure in all of the data with the student interviews and student survey. You know, when we ask questions such as who helps you with your homework, right? It wasn't usually parents. Sometimes it was grandparents who spoke the language fluently, but definitely that need for parental engagement, not only be engaged in school and come to the parent-teacher interviews maybe, but also for the parents to be interested and, like Devon said, to really believe that that language learning does not come at the detriment of learning English, right? That in fact, when we look at research, in applied linguistics, we see that when Indigenous languages are learned along with the English, it actually supports both of those languages. And, you know, that's there in bilingual education research. But when it comes, like Devon expressed, when it's shared sometimes with respect to Indigenous languages or Cree-Immersion program, as opposed to a practice like French immersion that has been going on for years, it's never questioned with French immersion programs as much, but it becomes a big question, you know, when it's in efforts to indigenize a language. So this, I think that colonial thinking and sometimes some of the oppressive practices still continue and linger to this point. And as Devon said, we need to actively try to respond to it. One other tension that I wanted to bring that came up from research, which was really important, and it is a controversial topic, but I think we have to take up all of these different tensions. One of these was with respect to purism, and like purism in terms of, you know, what is the standard language? What is the standard dialect? Because, you know, when we talk about a community, for example, such as OCN, it doesn't mean that there's always only one dialect that is in place. Even in schools, like teachers said, if there were sometimes hires who are teaching in Cree-Immersion schools, let's say, that there were tensions with respect to which form is the purest form, right? And dialect differences were a topic that emerged from those teacher responses. And like also respondents reported that there was still sometimes disagreements on whether to use, for example, OCN Cree or standard Roman orthography. You know, SRO uses the letters of the English alphabet to represent the Cree language sounds, and it's the most widely used for teaching purposes in Western Canada. But as a result of these different opinions, the teacher indicated that some students and community members are becoming frustrated at the inconsistencies in the language and tensions arise. So we don't want people to think that, like, there are those struggles too, right? When we think about the Cree language, thinking about the diversities of it, and from applied language, like Indigenous language revitalization efforts, we do see in the literature and the results of different research projects that whenever communities try to embrace the multiplicities of dialects that are available, along with the multiplicities of Indigenous languages in those communities, and they're tried to integrate into the curriculum, there's more openness and within the school. So there are tensions, obviously, but and language revitalization is a collaborative process, like Bev, Devon, and all the educators mentioned. It's a long journey with many challenges that require significant investment of time and human and material resources. But OCN is a really wonderful example that shows us that it can be done. And yeah.
Thank you. I think that's really beautiful. And we can hold that up as an example. You have this language declaration for your community and a dictionary and a history book, and you have elders coming in. You have so many wonderful things happening, and that's great to share. I wonder, we've identified challenges. I wonder if maybe this is just my curiosity, but I would love to hear a little bit about your thoughts moving forward, either ways to address those challenges or your imagination of where you want to go in the future.
one of the things that one of the initiatives we're working on is actually building our own Cree-Immersion school. And so that's a project that's in the works. I'm not sure how long it's going to take us, but you know, I hear from the educators that our students need to hear the language at recess, at lunchtime, and right throughout the day, and everyone needs to be using that language consistently. So from our perspective and what we can do in the school is to create a setting where that can happen. So that's one of the projects we're working on for the future, so that we can continue to produce speakers and to keep the language alive in the community as a whole.
I was thinking about having a central area, a building where only Cree language is spoken, and what Bev had mentioned. And I know this has come out in our community meetings as well, to have a central building where all these activities could take place, and our Cree language can be used as a teaching tool for our community members. But also having elders as teachers, and going out to the camps and for longer periods of time. That's something that I envision could happen for young people, not just a few days, but to be there and immerse with the culture, the teachings of living off the land and learning from our elders. Those were the two that I had thought about quite a bit.
Oh, I'd have to agree with both of them that I think the future for languages and cultures is on the land, and having that as the primary setting for education, I think, is going to be key in our students understanding their connection to the land as well as connection to each other. Kinship is really important, and that relationship to the land is important. And I think that's something that is still needs a lot of work. But again, we have to get that going soon, because our knowledge keepers that possess that knowledge are leaving us at an alarming rate. So we have to get that knowledge from them and pass it on to people who will carry that forward.
Just for sharing purposes too, I just wanted to share that when I meet up with somebody that speaks Cree, I can feel it in my body, my being. After I have the conversation and it's in Cree, and I say, that felt so good to speak with somebody in the same language. And it seems like it's getting further away from having that happen. And we need to really continue working hard and making sure that that our language is not lost.
Michelle, could I ask a question?
Sure, go ahead.
To the OCN folks, do you see any Cree language signs in the community that might help or might inspire people to use the language?
We actually do have a lot more signage that's in the language.
I just finished working with a community member too, Bev, one of our leaders. We did a lot of translation for public works with their facilities that they're developing, and those are all in Cree, and I worked with an elder to do that. So that was really nice to see. Yeah.
The community as a whole, the other branches within Opaskwayak are starting to do more with the language revitalization too. So that language declaration and the commitment from leadership, I think, is starting to show now in the community.
I would just like to thank you so much for coming and sharing with us. It's amazing to hear the things that you're doing. It's frustrating to hear that so much of it has had to be such grinding work, and that, you know, I think we're all aware that it's something that we need to support as a community more with funding and with different resources. And I think it's good that we have the time to talk about it and that we get to thinking about it and start moving people forward with that, because I think it's important for all of Manitoba to do some of that language revitalization. And I really enjoyed hearing what is going on at OCN. It's been several years since I've had a chance to visit your community, but I have lots of rich memories from when I was there, and I'm really glad to see all the work that you've been doing since then. You've done some really exciting things. So thanks for coming to join with us today and to share your experiences. I think it has been a valuable conversation.